Hi, my name is Piotr and welcome to Cloud Native Corner, where I focus on practical exploration of tools and projects in the cloud native space. Today, we are going to talk about vCluster. What is vCluster? Well, vCluster is a virtual Kubernetes cluster that is fully functional and nested inside of a physical host cluster. It provides better isolation and flexibility to support multi-tenancy scenarios. Why would we want to use vCluster? Well, multiple teams can operate independently within the same physical infrastructure. It can help minimize conflicts, maximize teams' autonomy, help them make different experiments, and at the same time reduce costs. Let's go real quick through vCluster architecture. On a high level, vCluster's main component is called Syncer. Syncer's job is to take the resources that are going to be deployed inside the vCluster and synchronize them down onto a host cluster. We will see this in action in a second. First things first, we need to install vCluster somehow onto our cluster. There are three ways that we can do it: using a CLI, which we will do, Helm chart, or directly using kubectl. CLI gives us quite nice interaction capabilities within our vCluster. Once vCluster is installed, we can actually ask ourselves what are other ways of isolating workloads on the Kubernetes cluster. Typically, platform teams or DevOps teams would use namespaces and make sure that namespaces contain all the appropriate permissions. Let's do that. We've created a namespace for Team A, and now we have to make sure that all the privileges are correct. In this case, we are allowing anyone from Team A to do anything with pod services and deployments. Of course, as a side effect, or rather an intended side effect, we cannot list or interact with cluster scope resources. If we would want to do it, the permissions would have to be adjusted. So you can see that this can take a little bit of time. All right, let's create a fresh vCluster. In order to do this, we can use a command line, give a vCluster name and optional namespace. And what's going to happen? vCluster is going to pull the resources onto our host and start installation process. vCluster consists of just stateful sets and regular Kubernetes resources, and it encapsulates also a control plane of Kubernetes, which is kubeAPI and other components. By default, vCluster comes with just a few resources. You can see that our command line port forwarded, and now we can talk to vCluster as if we would talk to a regular cluster. So what's inside? Not much. Core DNS, Kubernetes kubeAPI, and that's about it. So that's what comes with vCluster out of the box. Let's install something. We are going to install a deployment, which consists of an nginx pod, nginx service, and a namespace. So now, when we issue the same command, we should see a little bit more. Indeed, we have nginx pod, service, and deployment. How does vCluster store all this? First, let's disconnect from the vCluster and see what the resources have been synchronized down to the host cluster. So we can see the same namespace. We can see service. We cannot see deployment because it's not a low-level resource. This is actually an abstraction of a replica set and pod. So vCluster actually synchronized the pods, services, and namespace down to our host cluster, adjusting the naming convention in order to avoid naming collisions. So I mentioned earlier that Syncer stores the state of our resources and synchronizes them between host cluster and vCluster. So how does it do it? By default, vCluster uses SQLite. Let's copy SQLite file database onto our host cluster and see if we have all the resources available. And indeed, we have our namespace, deployments, replica sets, and everything stored inside of the database. Now we can reconnect to vCluster and explore it further. If you would like to do this on your own, the link to this interactive scenario would be in the video description. You can also use Octant, that enables us to see what's happening on the cluster. If you're interested and would like to learn more about vCluster, you can go to the official website. I've linked a few resources that I found helpful, and you can, of course, join a Slack channel. That's it for now. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, subscribe for more cloud native content. Thank you and see you next time.